Here I am trying to refer to a very low-hanging fruit which has a monumental impact onto the environment of the region. And this is basically in the Himalayan region, which is controlling the entire weather system, not of India and all the rivers which flow from India, Pakistan and all other countries. So the presence of the human presence on the glacier areas are causing a lot of problem. It is one of the largest, you can say, the glaciated areas other than the poles. So it is called the third pole, the Siachen Glacier. The pollution which is taken out, the melting of the glacier is controlled. So the entire weather system of this region can be benefited. And I do also appreciate that, I don't know what is holding India back to take this forward step, which is, I think, going to be a very monumental step in the further solving of the territorial disputes around the area. And though it's maybe a very low-hanging fruit, but I don't know why India is not picking up this low-hanging fruit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ratan, would you like to take the first?
Yes. Let me first address your question, Abhishek. I'm not sure it's a low-hanging fruit. There's a third party involved because the glacier does involve China. And what you say about demilitarization is true for our entire line of control, our entire disputed border. And if we can solve it, I'm with you, let's do it. But I don't think that's going to be, we will not be able to do it by taking Siachen alone, notwithstanding the environmental obligations, because on both sides I think the issue is that there's a difference of opinion there's an epistemic difference of opinion on primary responsibility, and I'm being neutral here, for that region, and therefore the externality, which is the environmental benefit, would depend on our coming to a shared view on that dispute, in which there is a third party when you bring in the Himalayan angle, which is China. And until such time as that happens, I think it would be pointless to advocate demilitarizing Siachen specifically, particularly given the events of the last week. So the other thing I wanted to say was on finance, but I first want to completely sort of thank you, Jyotsna, for bringing this up, because I have a big problem, this problem, which is the practice of things, and there's a political disconnect. See, everybody I remember when I was 18, the great freedom I got. I'll say two things to you. Growing up in India as a child, whenever I was in air conditioning, I felt a sense of physical well-being. Rich people were air conditioned. Things didn't smell so bad. Things smelled good. So you felt nice. And that is part of the sense of well-being that people have as a country evolves. One. Two, I remember the sense of freedom I had when I bought my first bike. And then, not when I bought a car because I moved abroad, but I have friends who felt, I see my assistant professor lovingly polishing his little Maruti every Sunday. And the attention he devotes to that is far more than he does to his garden and the environment. Given that India is going to be, so it's a contradiction. India is going to be the first country in the world, in the history of the world, to be asked to complete its development transformation without substantial recourse to incremental fossil fuels. But it's also being asked to therefore manage aspirations on that basis. And this is what people say it. And there is also a problem in legitimacy. So if I, as a member of the elite who have driven cars and done all this, I love public transport now because I know I'm well off. Rich people, rich countries are countries where the rich use public transport. But we're not a rich country. And this transition has never been done. Now, how am I going to tell 150 million Indians that driving a car is a terrible thing to do? So either technology will help me and you will bring in electric cars and all that, but they better have that oomph that Lamborghini has. Because otherwise I'm not going to be able to convince my public, and if I can't do that, politicians are very smart, they will not listen to me. And since I'm the biggest country that's going to do this first and not Africa, we'll just go ahead. So on climate finance, first on environmental taxation. See, one is, of course, with environmental taxation, the problem is the tax base and who you tax. So it's very difficult to avoid what is called incidence shifting on the taxation. So for instance, let's take an environmental bad, I don't know. Let's take somebody who is in their ecosystem producing a lot of carbon. That person will, if I say I want to tax you, they'll say, why don't you tax the person who is demanding the goods that generate this carbon? This problem is soluble, but it is far more difficult to solve in a simple way. As long as, and the reason for that is this, all taxes normally, their objective is to generate revenue, and you don't care about the consequences. So an income tax officer should not care about the source of my income. I could earn it from selling cocaine on the streets of New York. My revenue department should not be asking that question. We should collect our tax and go home. That's the second canon that environmental taxation violates. The separation between the idea of taxation as revenue and the intention to use taxation. The third is a jurisdiction problem, which I pointed out in a paper in the UN in 2004, and no one read it. This airline tax. You're going to collect the money, right? Now, is each country going to spend its airline taxes on its own environmental goods? If that is so, you're replicating an already adverse distribution or production of huge distortions. If you're not going to do that, and you collect the taxes, who is going to decide how to spend it? The UN or World Bank, Bank of International Settlements? So there's an institutional architecture question. These are the three major impediments to moving, and very honestly, that's the problem. There's a fundamental clash between the canons of good public finance and the intentions underlying environmental taxation. And we have not progressed very far in doing this, except in areas where we got lucky. Like when you tax oil, it's really cool because it's inelastic and gets you lots of revenue. And it happens to be good for the environment. Or you tax coal, it's really cool, it's inelastic and it brings in lots of revenue. So in those happy marriages, we managed to work well. On climate finance, I want to say, in addition to what Manish said, there are two dimensions which I think have not been said, which need to be kept in mind. I'm glad you said we'll be 75% dependent on coal. This is something we need to take very seriously. I need your collective help as a community. See, the World Bank, I managed to get Todd Stern to change that. I don't know, you tell me. Board, with US support, went and said that, not World Bank staff, World Bank board, thou shalt not give money to anyone who invests in fossil fuels. Certainly coal, I don't know what fossil fuels. And the Europeans have got onto this sort of Jesuitic theological thing about coal is bad. I love it. I carry lumps of coal with them. Oh, this European. Coal. Okay, so what he said is very important. I come from a country where it's going to be the fastest growing country in the world, and 70% of my energy resources, 60 are going to be coal. And come to India one day and see how I mine my coal. It's open cast mining. I mine it with bare hands. It's really dirty. It's horrible. It's worse than your worst nightmares in terms of fossil fuel. And once I get to that 70, forget climate change, I'm going to be melting your ice cap in the Arctic. You're going to be needing a lot more money to keep Norway at 21 degrees when it's minus 14 outside. So this theology about coal is going to kill you because of India. Because if you don't give me money to clean up my coal act, or you tell me there's no such thing as clean coal, apparently there is or there is not, then either let's find something to do with clean coal because that's all I have, or we will pollute this planet. And the attitude of my politicians will be that my kids are dead anyway because they're digging that coal, so we'll just, I'll have to participate with me in that journey. It's a very serious problem. And there's a lack of understanding and a theological problem which we need to fix yesterday. And we're not making much traction with it. I'm told by Todd Stern that the World Bank has modified this, and apparently if I invest in cleaner fossil fuels, the bank will deign to consider finance. I hope that is true. But the bank is marginal player. My problem is the private sector entities. All those old people's pension funds sitting out there at 1%, which I need in my country to develop my energy ecosystem, and I'm going to give you 7%, and you say, no, you're doing coal. That is one. Second problem is with solar, and Manish, this should interest you. So not your report because it has
but your last comments interested me as well.
about pension funds and coal.
About coal.
Yeah, because if you just say it's a barrier, I don't like coal, I'm not going to give you money. Nothing is going to change in India. We will produce 70% of our electricity with very dirty coal. And I've commissioned research now which will show the Norwegians and the Swedes and all the people who now, want to go clean that will melt their Arctic ice cap. So I don't want to use this, as James Scott said, as a weapon of the weak, but we'll get there in 5 years. The second problem is with this solar business. So 5 years ago, when the Europeans suddenly realized that our children had a common future, which didn't tell me till 1995, they began to say we have a common future, we're destroying this planet. I said, cool. They said, we must go solar. So we said, cool. And they said, really exciting things are happening in solar which you have captured. Unit costs are going down, right? Cool. So we can go into solar. So we, you know what, because the Norwegians won't give us money for coal, we went to the Japanese and they gave us a $100 billion loan from SoftBank to do this. That's 27 gigs, huh? So it's not trivial. We are well on the way. We have the money to start. So at one stage I was involved in something with the Ministry of Finance and I said, let me take a look at the revenue streams that we are getting after we implement these solar plants. I found to my consternation that depending on which project it was, between 22 and 30% of the revenues from this stream revert to the provider of this wonderful technology that will save the planet as first charge. Which means the first thing I will do is pay the Japanese back for the privilege of using solar. So suddenly our common children are going to pay for my uncommon grandmother. So I have to pay for demographic aging in Japan and in Europe by going solar, by taking these payments as first charge. So this is not something that's come up fully on the map, but I'll make sure it does. And we really need to do something. This can derail Paris. This is not acceptable. Somewhere public financing will have to be found to pay for these intellectual property rights, and there is no appetite. Oh, and I have to add one more thing, need I add it? Other than China, which is a different ballpark, the 4 providers of this wonderful batteries that will save our children and your children and everyone's children are Japan, Germany, France, and the United States of America. Okay? And this will not work. This political economy will not work. So the problem with climate finance is a political economy problem in all the dimensions that I raised. In India, there's one good thing about off-grid. In India, electricity is power. I can switch on and switch off power and I can control your boat, I can control your life. What off-grid is doing is fantastic in that sense. It's creating, if only I didn't have to pay 30% of that back to Japan. It is empowerment by making sure that people who go off-grid are actually able to lead their lives without reverting to the very regressive feudal political economy of their village, etc. I've seen this in Bihar. It is changing caste relations in Bihar. It is causing productive resistance to happen, which is fantastic. So on off-grid, yes, I'm completely with you.
Can I
All right,
comment
thank
on the off-grid?
Manish, you'll get the last word here as we're
Yes,
down.
please on hold.
I don't know how much time I have, but I will keep it brief. And I agreed with, and I'm not sure So I do want to say just a word on coal, and then I'll come to the question on cities and kind of behavioral change. But and this probably requires a much longer conversation than we're going to be able to have here. But I do think, so first point, we all agree that coal will continue for the foreseeable future to play a very important role in the power mix for India. Second point, I think as we think about how India chooses to invest in coal versus kind of modern renewables, that doing a proper full economic cost benefit analysis would make tremendous sense. And that part of the point that I'm trying to make is that irrespective of climate, given the increasing kind of import dependence of India on coal, on oil and gas, and the costs associated with that, both in terms of price, but also in terms of volatility. But also the land acquisition, the immediate environmental impacts, but in particular a lot of the air pollution impacts. Just having to fully take that into account, and then also take into account not where solar is today, but where also solar will be 5 years from now, and 10 years from now, that conversation becomes quite a bit more
I don't want to become an iPhone 7 conversation. Where I say, I get iPhone and you say iPhone 7 is good, but all I'm doing is paying for IP.
Right. No. There is a question about how to actually deal with the IP, so the technology transfer and the financing questions, embedded within that, hugely important to figure out. So I don't deny that at all. I think the point about the bank, and I see a representative, but the role of international public finance in coal is a slightly different question than what India needs to do on coal. I would separate the two, because I think, and so scarce international public resources, how they should best be allocated, might be a slightly different question than what India needs to do. And we can have a conversation about that, but I think that's also important. My understanding of the World Bank policy It's about coal, not about fossils at large, and it is about limiting bank investment in coal, except in exceptional cases, low-income countries with few alternatives for power when domestic access
But that's a
is an
political,
issue.
because that's because Saudi Arabia doesn't produce coal, and the US is the largest shareholder. Anyway, yeah.
So to be continued and perhaps over lunch. But just wanted to pick up also on this question around, which is a really important question. So a couple of things. One, I think you're absolutely right. No one can tell people what to do and say this is in your interest and expect there to be real uptake. So the argument that I was trying to make with what we were saying is that it is in their self-interest to do this. Even then, we know things that are in one's economic self-interest may not be taken up, right? And our friends up at MIT Poverty Action Lab have done a lot of research on how people don't do that, right? So there is, I think, a fear. But I wanted to just kind of tell the story briefly about Beijing, because I think Beijing is kind of an interesting example of what happened, in cities. For those who have been to Beijing, and I suspect many of you have, big streets, very car intensive, very kind of, big modern Chinese cities, big streets, lots of cars. That's not too big, right? In 2011, the US Embassy started to provide through its Twitter feed information about air pollution. Most people knew air pollution was bad. They didn't really know how bad it was. That information began to come out, created this remarkable kind of public awareness around the challenges of the health costs associated with air pollution kind of in Beijing. It led to this, I think the most downloaded movie in Chinese history was that what was it called? It was it was about 2 years ago, that Chinese journalist did something about the health costs of air pollution. And it was something like the apocalypse or air apocalypse or something to that effect.
Every city.
Of every city, not just...
Every city you can check the phone.
And now, because of that, it is transformed kind of awareness and engagement around this. And not only is that information now available, but what the Chinese government has done in Beijing, but in many cities around China, in terms of how to actually deal with that, is a massive change in just a short amount of years. Now you have massive investments going into public transit in China. You have a much greater uptake of public transit. You have, we're working with the Beijing municipal government on setting up a congestion charge in China to respond to the public outcry similar to what was modeled in London. So I don't have the answer, but I do think that there are stories of where greater awareness of the costs can perhaps mobilize greater engagement in the public to deal with some of the political economy questions that are needed.